All right, guys, this is your meat episode of the week. But before we get too far, let's start off with scripture because it's so important that we get every episode started the right way. That's getting in God's word. So, John chapter 12, verse 24. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. So, if you missed the spiritual kickoff, go back, check that out. There's a previous episode from here. And I really unpacked that. I went through a lot of detail around that verse in particular and how to simplify and apply that to your life. Now, today we're going to be talking a lot around a story that impacted this man. His name is Marcus Farris and his marriage. So his marriage failed. He walked through the road of divorce, and he wants to talk about basically how this impacted his faith. And this made him ultimately no less faithful. And we're talking about the scars of divorce and how that really revealed to him the heart of God. And so, Marcus began working where he's currently at, called Mission 22, as a post-traumatic growth director in January of 2020. So he was serving as an active duty engineer officer in Alaska for 4 years. He did that. Now he's here at Mission 22. He's passionate about all manner of endurance sports competition and spent a lot of his spare time working with the U.S. military endurance sports teams. So, guys, this is a really interesting conversation. Yeah, he's an ultramarathon, a very interesting guy, but he walked through the divorce, and I know that's impacted so many of our listeners. That's impacted me. I mean, I've shared openly with you guys. I've walked through a divorce, and how that shaped me, how that impacted my walk, my testimony, my life. And ultimately now how that's impacted my current marriage, where it's really been a blessing because if you've gone through a trial like that, it shapes you. It really does. And when you go through a trial, you can either be running from God or towards God. And if you run towards him, it's amazing what he will reveal to you when you need it the most. So this was a fun conversation, guys. I think there's a lot of good insights. The second half of the conversation, we get tactical around actual, he calls them first aid, but these are tactics that you can take when you're going through a trial. Maybe you're going through a divorce, you're a separation, or you're just a troubling time. Maybe it's just troubling time in your marriage, and you just need some time to think, and you need some time to process. He gives some very practical ways that you can take action to really improve you. Because at the end of the day, we need to be working on ourselves. And we need to be the man that our wife or the future Mrs. is looking for. We need to stop going out there looking for them. Let's just worry about being the man that they're looking for. And that means taking care of our health, right? Taking care of our finances, taking care of our responsibilities at work. I mean, all these different things. If we're doing that all under the umbrella of God's word, obviously that needs to be our ultimate beacon. Good things will happen. But this is a powerful conversation. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Get your notepad out, definitely for the second half, because it gets tactical, and I think that will help you in your journey. So enjoy this conversation with Marcus Farris. Well, Marcus Farris, welcome to The Lion Within Us. How you doing today?
Chris, so happy to be here. I'm doing great. Looking forward to the next season that's to come.
Absolutely. I am too, man. It's been great. I've been looking forward to it. I loved your book. I know we're going to unpack that and share a lot of insight for our listeners out there. But let's start with something fun. I see you're an ultra marathoner. So I got to know, what's the longest run you've ever done?
Oh, man, that would have been a race called the Pinhoti 100 back in 2010. It was a 100-mile race, point-to-point race from a bustling metropolis of Heflin, Alabama, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, down to Sylacauga. So if either of those cities sound familiar to anyone, I'd be very impressed. It was a 100-mile foot race, and I finished it in just over 24 hours.
Oh, my gracious, man. So, I mean, on a race like that, how many calories are you taking with you to consume just so that you can actually make it to the finish line?
Yeah, in races like that, you definitely have to have different considerations than something like a 50K or like a half marathon or a half marathon too, or shorter races where you can just get away with taking your typical gels and your normal sports nutrition, and then you get to a point where you make use of the aid stations that have like sort of real food. I remember eating probably my favorite part of the race in terms of food was at mile 75. It was probably, I don't know, coming up on midnight. And there are these switchbacks way up to the kind of the top of one of the highest points in the race. And it was run by a group of ultramarathoners from Georgia who come out every year, and they were serving up fried egg sandwiches. And by the time you get up to the top, man, like it tasted so good. But you kind of get to the point where just anything salty and savory, or just like you can't do sugar for that long, you know. I couldn't tell you the number of calories just off the top of my head, but it was the rule in ultra running is like those races really are eating competitions with a bit of running thrown in. So and then you eat before you're hungry, drink before you're thirsty, and one foot in front of the other, and you'll eventually get there.
Man, that's impressive. I can also say I've never interviewed an ultra marathoner, so this is pretty cool. I'm excited to learn more. I think that tells us a lot about your personality. As we get started. But tell us your story and how divorce ultimately rocked your faith. I'd love just to hear your perspective as you get us going and get our listeners up to speed here.
Yeah, one thing I will say is that I'm lately, as we're having this conversation near the end of 2022, the last days of, I guess, legally when I was married were, they feel like they're so far behind me in such a short amount of time. So as I look at it from this perspective, what I can say is that within the span of about 3 years, it feels like I lived like a whole nother lifetime almost. And so I guess that would be my encouragement today for anybody who's like in the midst of it. There is just a tremendous amount of potential for you to realize so much more about what you can live for. And what I've learned is like that whole process was for me and not to me, if that makes sense. And so God gave me a significant amount of raw material to restart and make something new out of that whole season. I'll share a story that actually happened very recently. I was in Japan for about 3 weeks over the first 3 weeks or so of December doing a military exercise. And en route, we flew through Fairbanks. And if you've read the book at all, you know that a lot of my story kind of occurs in Alaska between Anchorage and Fairbanks. And I hadn't been to that city in quite some time. And as I was sitting out there on the tarmac, I could almost see my house from where the plane sat, because in Fairbanks, you have the airport's just like right next to the city. And I used to live, when I was married, in Fairbanks, just down the road from there. And so it was weird, because it was kind of like going back and realizing that what you thought was a dream was like, there's something like it's there and it's real and you can visit it. And it was interesting for me because I had to hold two truths at once, because when I reflect on my time, like in the early days of that marriage, like things seemed really good. We had a great small group. It was sort of this fresh young love that seemed to be blossoming. And then in retrospect, the fact that it all dissolved later in a manner I never would have predicted, it's sort of this dichotomy between like, yes, it was a genuine, good, loving relationship. And it's also true that there's something latent that we wouldn't realize until later. So we moved away from Fairbanks in May of 2017 down to Central Oregon, which is where I'm now, with a little bit of a different circumstance than what was going on then in terms of career and house and everything else. And it took about 3-ish years for her to kind of realize, like, man, I got into this relationship for the wrong reasons. And for me to realize, like, I was a little trigger happy, you could say, when I first met her, thinking like, wow, man, like I've met somebody who's just so perfect, so good. Like I hadn't really dated a whole lot prior to having met her and jumped into it fairly naively. I kind of articulate that a little bit more in the book, but so yeah, let's see. So summer of 2019, I went to Nice, France, where I did the last triathlon I've done in a while. I kind of hung up the shoes from that sport. I did that for a couple of seasons, and that trip really marked kind of the crossing over between the old life and the new life that I'm here with, being able to talk to you now about. I'll tell you that there's a really cool. So let's see. Today is the 19th. We're 2 days away from the winter solstice, right? And so, from the Christian perspective, you might think like, man, the Yule log thing and the whole like celebrating solstice, isn't that sort of a pagan kind of an idea? And sure, but one of the cool things about the darkest part of the year is where the light shines brightest. And I think that trope is not lost in the Christian tradition of celebrating Christmas this time of year. The critics might talk about like, oh, Christ was never born. It's probably the springtime. It doesn't make sense that it would be winter, blah, blah, blah. But the point of celebrating it in winter is to acknowledge that the brightest things come out of the darkest days. And I think that's a really important thing to understand with your own story. In the Jewish calendar, the new day began in the evening, right? For that same reason. So it's like you begin the journey in darkness with the promise of light ahead of you. And I had one of those moments in the summer of 2019. This was the same summer that I found out what had happened with the marriage and knowing that it was on its last legs. There was a health coaching institute that I signed up for earlier that year. I was kind of reevaluating what I was wanting to do with my career. I studied engineering as my undergrad degree, and my early days in active duty military was in the engineering realm. It's also what my dad did, so I was kind of following in that. But I had a heart for something to do with fitness of some sort. And I heard about health coaching, and it really intrigued me. So I started that program at the beginning of February 2019. And near September timeframe, that was right before the Nice trip, that was when kind of the bottom had fallen out of the marriage. Like it just seemed like so many things were over. And right before I left for France, I got a call from the job I was currently working at, letting me know I was fired, which they didn't really give a very good explanation. They were just like, don't come back after your trip. And so within 5 minutes of that phone call, the FedEx man shows up and arrives with a package that basically is like my graduation kit for this health coaching thing. Within 5 minutes, like I didn't make that up. And it really felt like that moment where you go to a candlelight service and you have the single flame with darkness all around. Like it really felt like that. And that was kind of the seed that grew into where I'm at today.
Man, it sounds like to me right here, that's a great example of God's timing, right? I mean, it's perfect. He's never early, but the timing's always perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what you're doing now. So just to kind of give us a quick update. So now you're doing health coaching. That sounds like what you got going on.
Yeah. And it's really so much more than that. So right after I got back from that France trip, I went to Portland to go meet with the company called Mission 22, which is a nonprofit that does work with veterans and their families. And I had met those guys. That was a whole another story maybe we can get into later. But I ended up meeting the founder of that company, Magnus Johnson, through some mutual friends that I met on another church retreat. And so I went there and just like, I didn't have a job. I was like driving for Lyft just to make enough money on the side, and kind of pitched myself as a health coach to them. And around that same time, near the end of that year, they had the idea for something called the R&R program, which is the Recovery and Resiliency program that is what I'm working with now. So that program, basically, it's the idea of the company is like, well, shoot, there are so many services and nonprofits out there specifically for veterans, but veteran suicide rates don't seem to be improving at all. What are we missing? So the idea of the program was like, hey, look, let's combine all of the modalities of healing that have worked forever, updated with a bit of modern science and technology, and then put it in the hands of the individuals who are dealing with this, as opposed to putting the healing power within a select few individuals that can be very difficult to get to in a overburdened system. So that story of restoration and kind of coming back home and completing the hero's journey on the veteran storyline, like imagine, actual combat and coming back home and reintegrating. It has all of the characteristics of someone at home who maybe is a civilian or, maybe didn't deploy, who's dealing with kind of the same stuff. And what was really cool to find out was actually for me to have experienced that dark night of the soul by losing a marriage, I was able to much more deeply connect with veterans coming back from war. And indeed, a lot of marriages fail there for various reasons. And so the healing and recovery modalities that go along with what the collapse, we use the term moral injury a lot when it comes to combat stress. And that's also true when it comes to losing a marriage. And so in my story, I was I grew up in the South in Birmingham, Alabama, moved around a bunch when I was younger. So I did get a little bit of exposure to different ways of thinking, but suffice to say that I was pretty sheltered. I was pretty not very well acquainted with the difficulties and challenges and real issues that the world had to offer later on. And I think that was one of the things that kind of led to my jumping too quickly into a marriage that I probably should have pumped the brakes on a bit. Notwithstanding, there's that moment of moral injury where basically the way that you thought that the world operates and people operate and how you're treated just gets blown up. And that can be as a result of experiencing combat. It can be the result of experiencing a betrayal. It can be the result of even experiencing your house burning down, although natural disasters tend to be a little easier on the psyche. But anyway, so I realized, like, man, all of those stories that call to us that we're so interested in, fill in the blank, like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars or Harry Potter or any of those, just like, why is the human psyche so attracted to these patterns? And it's because it's our life. Like we go through those patterns too. And that's very useful to know. It's useful to know that when you're in the abyss, when you're in sort of this place of ultimate chaos, there's a way out. And there's a story that you are a part of, that you have a path ahead of you where you're going to figure out what that sort of proverbial magic elixir is that you can then share with others. And that's kind of what I see myself doing now.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, in the experiences that you have, as you mentioned, from a military standpoint, that you'll be able to connect with those guys directly and have that empathy with them. And so it sounds like you're on a great path. And I mean, as someone who's walked through the road of divorce myself, Marcus, I think we have a lot of commonality here. So let's jump into a couple of things within your book, because I think there's so many different items that it really sparked my interest and it served me. And I'm pretty sure to help our guys as well. But going right into your book, there's a quote that I was hoping to get your insight on. It says, "Marriage is a race to teach us more about our purpose, to train us to run well, and it's no less than a life-generating crucible." So I'd love for you to unpack that, give us some more insight into what you're trying to share there, because I definitely agree that it's not just about us. There's definitely a higher purpose, a higher calling to marriage in general.
Yeah, the lesson that I didn't really understand was that your partner, your wife, is your beneficial adversary. The Hebrew word in Genesis actually refers to her as such, or the essential other that you couldn't do without. But it's still a sort of adversarial relationship because we're very different than them, and we can't help that. But if you understand that that's part of the deal, then you don't have to be afraid of conflict so much anymore. And so. But also, there's another really interesting way of thinking about it that has helped me a lot in terms of, do you sacrifice for the other person or do you sacrifice for something else? And the problem with sacrificing for another flawed human being is that you start to expect things back from her. You start to expect, like, well, I made all of these sacrifices for you and you didn't give back the way that I expected. Okay, so wrong answer. You don't sacrifice for her. You sacrifice for the sake of the relationship itself. And that's different, right? So like let's just say hypothetically that somebody was in a marriage and was betrayed and the other person just left and it was like zero fault of their own, although it rarely, if ever, is. But hypothetically, let's just say that it is. And so you might think like, well, this whole idea of sacrificing yourself, of putting the other person ahead of yourself for the benefit of them, and then the response from them is a betrayal, which according to Dante's hierarchy of sins is like the worst possible one because of how deeply it stings, which is also why it was featured in Christ's story, right? But that's not the point. You don't sacrifice for her, you sacrifice for something bigger. And so when you operate along a sort of sacrificial system, then you start to realize, like, man, just the process of sacrificing the thing that's easy now for something that's hard later, just that process alone turns me into the type of human being that God wants me to be. And that might be found through marriage. And I think that's one of the most important things that marriage can teach. But again, it's not so much for the sake of the relationship or for the sake of her. It's for the sake of just understanding intimate relationships as such. And I think that's a very important mechanism, I guess, to understand. Maybe mechanism is not quite the right word, but that's the kind of relationship that we have with God. And he's like, if we're only aiming at a marriage, we're not aiming high enough. And we have to realize that marriage is a very palpable way to learn that lesson, but it's one of many ways. And divorce can be another way to learn that too. And so, man, it's another thing that I kind of wrestled with was like, is it God's will that I be divorced? Because I held out for 14 months and then she ended up doing the paperwork and because I just couldn't bring myself to do it, right? I couldn't bring myself to fill out the paperwork and actually come to terms with this. And it's like the Bible teaches reconciliation and all these things, and doesn't God hate divorce and this and that? And it's like, well, the law shows us the ideal. It shows us how things are not and things that we can strive toward, but it also takes a very frank and honest look at the reality of sin and what to do in that light. And sometimes decisions in life come down to choosing the cleanest dirty shirt you got.
So true. So true. Hey guys, we'll be right back. Most men know what it's like to do life in a vacuum and feel isolated on the journey. We believe every man needs a community to help them become the men they were created to be. More than just a website or podcast, we are a community of Christian men who are committed to supporting and encouraging one another on our journey to become the best versions of ourselves. We are men who have fought the good fight and come out victorious. The lion within us is here to help you stop feeling lost, defeated, and alone. Instead, find community and connection with other men that will help you achieve your goals, live a life of purpose, and be the leader God intends you to be. Visit thelionwithin.us to join the new growing Lions Den community today. So Marcus, I'm curious, man, just kind of getting to the heart of some of this stuff too. Where was Christ in your marriage? You know, when things were going good or at the beginning, where'd you have Christ at?
Ostensibly in the center. It's
okay.
Starting out the relationship. So I recount the story in the book, how I spent a good 6-hour car ride going up to meet her to decide to tell her that I loved her, wanted to spend my life with her. And it's like, right. God, if this isn't what you want for me, please tell me. Like, I want to do this correctly and I want to do this properly and do it your way. But she was a very new believer, if a genuine one at all. And I wasn't ready to hear the message from him like, hey, bro, you need to wait. You need to pump the brakes here. I know you're excited. I know you've got all these chemicals happening that you're not used to having. But you really need to take a step back and evaluate this and take your time. And that was not a message I was willing to hear. And so to the extent that Christ was in the center of that, it was like at the beginning, I think there were a lot of interesting things that I saw and experienced that led me to believe that this was like a relationship that honored God, that we were heading in the right direction.
Right.
And it's so curious to sort of reflect on, I was too hasty, but I was also pretty young. I didn't really know much better. And God still used that, naivety, the whole circumstance to bring about something else. And the reality of the fact that sin exists, but seeing how that's transmuted into something much better was something that took a while to learn and kind of took a while to settle in. And it's something I'm still reflecting on. But that is how it works. Like it's anytime something breaks down, you've got pieces that you can put back together in a different way. Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, but it sounds like in many ways, and I hear this from a lot of guys, and me included, the idea of patience was not there at the beginning, right? You sound like you were really you mentioned you're kind of rushing through a lot of these steps just to because you felt like everything was lining up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's like when the female deer are in heat that the hunters can take advantage of what the males are up to, right? You really start to let your guard down. You decide like, oh man, pursuing this person's the most amazing euphoric thing in the entire universe, and I need to forsake everything else. And it's like, oh, that kind of sounds a bit like a drug addiction there, dude. And so I never really had that mentor in my life to like sit me down. It was like, look, here's what to expect. Like and that's why like surrounding yourself with people who have been there before is so vitally important. Because if you have those feelings and experience in a place of isolation, then you don't have a context for what it all means. It's just like your body is telling you, go and do this and chase this with every single fiber of your being. And you don't have that sort of spiritual mentor to temper those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need to have that season, that wisdom around us. That's the word I was looking for, to help guide us and direct us and to help us sometimes see the things that we can't see. Because I mean, if we're following our biology, a lot of times the theology goes out the window, right? I mean, and that's just the way so many guys respond. They're following what their natural urges are versus, hey, let's slow down. Let's figure out, is this really what God wants from me? Or is this just some coincidences that just happen to be happening right now?
Yeah.
So good. Well, let's jump to the heart of what happened, because I think this is, I've talked to a lot of guys who are struggling with, infidelity and things happening in our marriages. And on page 52 in your book, you talk about the moment my wife of 4 years worked up the courage to admit her unfaithfulness was the moment my second half of life journey began. I was no longer a naive church kid. My eyes were open to the realities of real pain, and my descent into the underworld began. And as someone who's been there myself and felt that unfaithfulness, I know the impact that it has on you, and how that can just leave you feeling so broken and hurt. So maybe explain a little bit more what was going on here, and then what would you tell a fellow brother out there who may be listening, who may be facing this right now, that helped you get through this?
Yeah, in terms of kind of how the story went down, basically what had happened was she kind of out of nowhere decided like maybe it would be cool if we were foster parents. And that was very new to me. I wasn't quite ready for children.
Right.
And I made a comment like, if we're going to do that, we should be more plugged in with the church. Like, I don't feel like we have a solid small group like we used to in Fairbanks. And that was kind of when she realized like, oh man, I really don't believe the same things he does. I don't want to go to church. I don't want to pray before meals. I don't want to read my Bible, like kind of total rejection of all those things. And that was really a blindside for me, because for that first like 3 years, that was absolutely not the case. It was quite the opposite. We had really good, loving Christian people in our lives. And so that was such a precipitous drop that I think that was the thing that walloped me the most. And so for people who are kind of feeling that right now, you're feeling exactly the feelings Christ felt at Gethsemane. Like this is part of the story. And one of the things I want to get across is like, hey, like betrayal obviously is not the ideal. We live in a very sinful world, but to be able to persist through it will give you like, that's sort of the proverbial gold that the dragon's hiding, right? So the dragon is that creature that's sort of the amalgam of all of the predatory things that could destroy you. And a separation and divorce season is definitely a type of dragon, because it can destroy people. But so the thing is, like, it hides the gold if you can learn to contend with it. And it's going to suck for a while. Like, that's part of the deal. It's going to break you down, and it's going to make you feel like you don't know who you are anymore. Because when you're betrayed, you then have to ask, like, well, was I a sucker? Like, was I so just like, how did I not see this coming? Like, it brings so many things into question. And dissolution is actually a pretty good word for what happens. Because like the thing that you thought was solid is now liquid, and it's going to feel like you're drowning. It's going to feel like everything is unknown. It's going to feel like there's no new future for you. But that's not true. That's not how it works. You're not a fortune teller. You don't know what's going to come. And I can just tell you from my experience, like I can say unequivocally and categorically that my life is on a much more exciting, more impactful trajectory now than it ever was before when I was married. Like, I can say that with full confidence. And it's sort of like the people you hear about who get cancer diagnosis is like, I don't wish that on anyone, but it's given me such an extraordinary perspective. It's a better gift than just being well and unconscious to the nature of God's creation.
Yeah. I'm curious. And when you said, so sounds like the first 3 years, you guys are on a pretty good path, but then all of a sudden it's her interest in Christianity, church, praying, all that stuff, sound like it shifted. So did something happen there that really pulled her, her way, or rocked her faith by any way?
So in my estimation, God knows exactly what her heart is, and I really don't. But I think like in my own sort of postmortems, the way I've looked at it is like Fairbanks had enough social and environmental supports that those types of questions could be sort of swept under the rug. So I got into a counseling program. I'm getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling to go along with all the stuff I'm doing at work. And one of the pathologies that you learn about, and I know that our current pathological system of mental health has its flaws, but there is something called codependent personality disorder. which she checked all the boxes for. And so this is basically a case where instead of developing your own sense of self, you outsource it to serial relationships. So that is what she had done since she was 16 years old. It's basically like, I don't want to do the work of getting to know myself, so I'm just going to abdicate to someone else. And so that also was paired with a high agreeable personality trait where you just go with the flow and you want to be a team player and you don't want to rock the boat. Her mom was exactly the same way. And that's not good because that means you can't negotiate. It means you don't have a voice for yourself. And for 3 years, she didn't really need a voice for herself because she was where she wanted to be. Things seemed to be safe. Even if she didn't really want to go to church, she still had good friends. She still liked what she did. And then when all of that was removed, suddenly it revealed, like the tide rolling out, all of the underlying things that neither one of us knew how to address. And so that's kind of when it kind of came falling down.
Mm-hmm. But it sounds like you've been a believer for quite a long time, right?
For as long as I can remember.
Okay. So, I mean, is it a fair assessment to say you guys were pretty unequally yoked there from where you were versus where she was in her faith?
1,000%. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a piece that it's so important in our marriages to make sure that we are equally yoked because, I mean, you were obviously headed in the direction you felt like God was calling your life, but she's not there, man. You're just going in a circle, right? And then at some point, the yoke's going to break. And that's ultimately what happened here.
Yeah. And the thing about uneven yokedness, if that's a word, is that can apply to just your basic spiritual maturity. Like, I don't know, if I were to meet some 21-year-old who found Christ within the last 6 months, maybe that could work, but there's also a high probability that you're going to have some challenges in that. So yeah, I mean, you don't want to get arrogant about it and like think of yourself better than them, but it's that Paul does talk about, like, for some people they need milk still, and that's okay, and others they need meat. And so for a meat eater and a milk drinker, sometimes the relationship's going to have some challenges if some basic fundamentals aren't rock solid.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the big thing I want guys out there to understand is, God, from my standpoint, he, so far as interracial marriage, he doesn't care. I mean, God is love. All that stuff's fine. Where it gets rocky and it gets turbulent is when you have that faith isn't aligned. You want to have that faith aligned, headed in the right direction. Because if you're trying to glorify God and everything that you are as a man, and ultimately our marriages, that's what it's about. Marriage is about glorifying God together. If your spouse isn't there, you're not going to be able to achieve the things God has called you for in your life and wants for you in your life. So that's why, partner selection and making sure that we're doing the right things together as a marriage and as a married couple is so critically important. So I'm glad you brought up that point there, man, for sure. So, I mean, I guess, looking back, were there any signs that you now, hindsight being 2020, right? That you can look back and say, man, I wish I could go back and tell myself this, earlier, and that would have saved you some lessons learned.
Yeah, I've thought about that. What's that old country song about, like, if I could write a letter to me, right?
Yeah, that's right. Right.
It's such a strange paradox because on the one hand, it's like, man, if only I could have sent myself a message of just like, don't touch that with a 10-foot pole, like stay far away. I actually did have a guy in a small group that I confided in during that time, and he used that exact line, like, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole if she's not the same sort of frequency as you. And so in a very real sense, I did have that message and I just didn't want to listen to it. So, I think the letters to me wouldn't really have been so effective. And also, it's not obvious to me on this side of it that I should have avoided it. It's strange. It's kind of a paradox, but it became kind of my cross to bear that produced more fruit than I ever could have imagined. So should I have prevented myself from experiencing that and like been patient and found a marriage that would have been, longer lasting? I don't know if that is the case because now, who knows what the, alternate history would have been, but I'm in a place now that God's brought me that like I wouldn't trade for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, we'll take a quick break, guys. Be right back. How many of you guys can recite all the lines of Sweet Home Alabama without breathing hard? But when it comes to recalling God's word, you get stuck. To help you out, we identified 10 scriptures you need to fight like a lion and a plan to help you get them cemented in your heart. So grab this free resource, and I'm going to come alongside of you in a series of personal and engaging messages designed to challenge and help you grow. So get equipped today with the scripture that will help you fight the battle you are in. Visit thelionwithin.us to get started today. That's thelionwithin.us to unlock this free guide you need to fight like a lion. I asked you that because, I mean, for me, I can look back to, and there were signals, there were things. I was not listening to God. I wasn't just like you. I was just I was going for it. I thought I was doing what he wanted me to do, but ultimately I was doing my plan. But I can tell you this, man, for walking through the road of divorce and what that meant for me and the things that I learned and I grew just through the stress of that trial, just that season of life, it sucked. I'm just going to be honest. It was not a fun season of life, but I can tell you now that it has made my marriage now 100 times better because I can appreciate the way that God has designed marriage and what it can be. And when you actually see that, man, the little things don't bother me as much anymore in my marriage like it used to. So I don't know, maybe just to give you some hope, or also to give the guys that they're listening who may be in that season in between, right? You maybe you've come out of divorce and you're by yourself right now. You're trying to figure out the next steps. I mean, you went through that trial for a reason. That refinement was there for a reason. I think it will definitely help us all grow. So just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah. And as I kind of have thought through it too from other angles, it's like the world does not leave anyone unscathed. Like I was going to get hurt one way or the other. There was this old movie, I think came out in the early 2000s called Timeline, if I remember that right. And there's this guy who built a time machine to save his fiance who got killed in a car wreck. And the way the movie recounts it is like he goes back 1,000 different times, and every single time she still dies in a different way, but like at the same time. So it didn't matter what he did. It's, it's kind of the paradox of like God's sovereignty and our agency. Like, where do those two things meet? And it's like, it was, and it will be something that you wrestle with, right? This is the whole Israel means my struggle with God, right? And so it's like, how could it be that it's sort of fated that something dies or someone dies, but that we get to sort of navigate that season how we choose. And so, if I had spared myself that divorce, I would have been depriving myself of the most important lessons I ever could have learned in life.
Yeah. I'm with you, man, all the way. I mean, it's so far, it's hard to walk through it, but I mean, I swear, I think it makes us, if you have go through, come on the other side and you run towards God through these trials, he's going to refine you. He's going to make you better. He's going to put you in a better position to serve others, just like you're doing right now, man. So, hats off to you. There's a section in your book where you call it first aid. And I love it because as guys, we get we want to get tactical. What can we do? What actions can we take to actually, move the ball down the field? So I love to unpack a few of these with you, if you don't mind, for our listeners. And just starting off with just thinking out loud. That was your first tactic that you called out. So why'd you go there with that one? And why is that so important?
Yeah, this is something that was not premeditated on my part, but I just found myself doing a lot. Because when you experience kind of a collapse of everything that you thought the way that your life was going, you have to rewrite your story with those things still part of your story. And so the way that I did that was like I would go on long walks and just speak, and it'll just be like it'll kind of be prayer. It was sort of a prayer, but it was also just like talking through things, trying to see things from different perspectives. Because talking out loud for a long period of time is thinking. It's the same thing, right? And it's thinking in a more ordered manner. And I don't know, it was sort of like self-talk therapy, if you will. What I would do is I would listen to some podcast about, it could be relationships, it could be something unrelated, just stuff that I was interested in personally. And then, I would find the place where I was working at the time had a trail not too far away, and I would go out on my lunch break on that trail and just walk and walk and walk. And sometimes I would go on runs and find a secluded place in the woods and just talk it out, like what's on my mind. There becomes a certain psychological pressure to speak things forth, to put them into order. I learned this really cool thing about the word demonstrate. So the word demonstrate means to de-monster. a couple of different languages have kind of the same connotation. And so I talked about dragons before, dragon, monster. You can use that in the same context here. To demonstrate something is to take the monster apart and put it into usable pieces. And so you do that by speaking forth truth. And you don't know what all the dragon has to offer until you're able to cut it into pieces with your words. Right. So like that's the image in Revelation where Christ has the sword coming out of his mouth. He's the word that puts into order the things that are chaotic in your life. And so you get to participate in that process. And the way that I did it is I just went and kind of talked to myself, talked to God in the presence of the forest for a while.
Well, that's powerful stuff right there. And I'm definitely going to have to use that demonstrate tip as for one of our tips of the week. 1 week, man, that's good stuff right there. I mean, and it's so true that there's something too as well. If it's negative thoughts that are pulling you down, just talking these things out loud, a lot of times you take the power away. You can actually say these things out. Next thing you know, you're able to process it more effectively and efficiently. Just by actually speaking it. Sometimes when you actually speak it, like, that's silly. Why am I even worried about that? And you can just talk it out through yourself. So.
Yeah, it's interesting how the effects of the words happening in your mind can have a very different effect when they're spoken out loud. And as opposed, like, it's sort of a process of like, if you're a slave to an old thought and you can put it into words, now you're its master.
Right. Exactly. Now your next area you talked about, I think it's going to resonate a lot with our guys because this is something I talk about, pretty consistently. Talk about physically demanding exercise with your tribes. We call it our lion's den, but just getting together with other guys, doing hard things, sweating. I always say guys connect shoulder to shoulder and when they're sweating. So, I mean, why is that important?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of reasons. I imagine your listeners this isn't the first time they've heard this, but one of the cool things about working out in groups is that it has a magnification of the effects of exercise by yourself. And there's a certain magic to doing hard things with other men where by the time you're done with your workout, then a lot of the facades start to fall off naturally. And the traditional sort of talk therapies that seem to be more efficacious for the female psyche start to work for men after you've gone through a difficult thing. So men bond through doing stressful things together. Our bonding hormone is called vasopressin, and you get a lot more vasopressin when you're with other guys doing tough things. So the bonding component is elicited after having gone through stress on purpose. And so another way to look at it is like if you're going through an extreme stress, like a divorce or whatever the crisis is, then practicing small stress makes you more adept at handling the big stress. Mm-hmm. And and then of course, like all of the other great benefits of exercise that I probably go without saying, but if you strengthen your body and you have physiological resilience, it does equip you to handle the psychological toll that a divorce season is going to take on you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, there's so much power in that, and just being able to get together with others. And I didn't realize the power you said. So there's the actual what was the word you mentioned where when guys get together, actually it multiplies the effect of the workout.
Yeah, in terms of the, I guess, psychopharmacological response, i.e. the chemicals happening in your brain which shift your mood, then when you're working out with others, there's something that's activated in the brain that's different than when you're just working out by yourself that allows you to bond with other people. So you might imagine our ancestors going out in the woods and going on a hunt. Like, if you're hunting with others and going through that stressful time, then it pays to have a biological response, which increases your connection with them. Because the more connected and in line you are with what they're doing, the better your hunting skills as a group is going to be. So we all have the thing that we need to hunt from, once in a while. And I think that's very appropriate to this idea of the lion within. Like, all of us have a thing that we have to hunt down, especially as men. Women have their own challenges and all of that. But like with men, it's a nuanced thing where you have to do something difficult with your body. You can't get around that. And whatever, that's going to be subjective to wherever somebody is at in life. But I really don't think that that's an optional exercise, I guess, an optional strategy. Another thing too is like, you're going to be depressed during a season of separation. Like, that's very normal. If you're not depressed, then you probably needed to leave the relationship anyway. So you can expect depression. And working out with a group is by far and away better than any antidepressant drug you'll ever get with none of the side effects. So why would you not do that? Like you got to make the choice to go and do hard things with other men.
That's such a valid point, man. I'm just thinking back when you were talking about when I went through the separation. I had one guy that I just started working out with pretty consistently, and I mean we pushed each other pretty hard. But during that season, I can tell you one thing: that was one of the biggest de-stressors I had was that doing hard things at the gym with him, lifting heavy weights, doing all the things that we did, basketball, whatever it would be for that day. But having that brother there, pushing me. That was big. So, I mean, thank you for sharing that and the insight there. And one of the actions you talk about, I practice, but I find not a lot of other guys do. It's practice with your pen. So let's talk about that for a minute, because I think there is so much value in taking thoughts and put them on paper. And what's the connection here? Why was this one big for you?
Yeah, well, I think part of this might be a bit of a personality thing because I really do love to write. I've been blogging for a very long time, and I do it for work. But the thing too about just putting things into, like what I found is like by writing stuff out, it's kind of like casting spells. So imagine, like if I were to tell you right now, like, hey man, you're looking really fit today. You're kind of glowing. You must be doing really well. Like you're going to start lighting up, and you're going to respond to that.
Right.
Conversely, like if I tell someone like, man, you're really sandbagging today, aren't you? Then suddenly like the spine kind of goes down a bit. And like words have magical power. Like, I'm using magical euphemistically, but by putting things into words, it's kind of the next step to talking it out. You're allowing yourself to try a bunch of different ways of looking at a thing. And then after it's on the paper, it's sort of like wiping the windshield off of your car window. And so we are, as God's creatures on this earth, one of the things that we're called to do. If anybody's kind of listened to Jordan Peterson and his whole like chaos and order type thing, and there's all of those tropes are in Genesis and are also in, I believe it's Proverbs 8. There's a really cool Bible Project video. I think it's Proverbs 8, where there's this line about the responsibility for the human to make decrees. And making decrees uses the same language as in Genesis of separating the waters from the land. And so the idea of using the pen on sort of a mythological sort of, what's the right word? Yeah, we'll stick with that for now. Archetypal, there we go. From a sort of archetypal perspective, as you're writing, what you're doing is you're separating all of the things that are very chaotic into things that are more manageable. And that's literally what's happening with your pen as you're writing. Typing's fine too, I guess. I had to type to make my book. So, but anyway, like there's something very mysterious about just like being able to see the things that are in your head. And yeah, like I mentioned before, like there's a certain like pressure to remove all of the various noises and voices and competing things in your head that, in psychology, one of the schools of psychology is called internal family systems. And so the idea there is that you have different sort of entities within you that are the source of various drives. So the psychoanalysts of the early 1900s kind of got into this idea of subpersonalities. And so basically the way you can think of it is like look at a small child. Like you see the small child, like one day or one moment, he's the hungry child. The next moment, he's the sleepy child. The next moment, he's the playful child. The next moment, he's the irritating child. It's like, you are a walking case of personality disorder. But of course, when you're that young, we don't consider it that. And the idea is you don't have an integration between all of the different drives within you. And so what you can do in therapy is like put on different hats of like, okay, right now you're sort of the rational thinker. Okay, now you're the emotional thinker. Okay, now you're the executive over these things. And you can put yourself in these different perspectives and then write out, what does that drive say? Like imagine that you are starving. What's that sort of sub component of you saying in that time, right? And then imagine you're the person who's lonely and afraid. Okay, write as if you are the one who's lonely and afraid. Okay, now imagine that you're your dad and you're writing to yourself as a father figure. Okay, what does he say? And by doing that, it's actually like you find that you can, talk about writing letters to myself. I learned this from Tim Farris. like write to yourself now as if you're your own self 20 years later. Like, what would your 20-year superior say to you now? And then like that in itself is actually quite revealing, because then you take that perspective and suddenly it's like knock and the door will be open, right? You're asking these questions and somehow your conscious produces them. And so that's why practicing with your pen is so important.
Now, you kind of breezed over it, though, but is it important? Is there something physically that helps if you actually use a pen versus a typewriter or a keyboard, rather? I mean, or do you find more value in putting that actual pen to paper, or is just typing it in a document okay too?
I think it's kind of the difference between reading a physical book and reading something on a screen. There's something tactile and intimate about literally using a pen, but I'm not going to say one way or the other of like which is better. I think whatever method gets somebody putting things to words is important.
There you go. Good point. Good point. Well, let's take our last break. We'll be right back, guys. Outside of God's word, what should you be reading to grow as a Christian leader? It can be daunting to see all the options available these days. To help bring you some sanity to your search, we compiled all of our featured books of the week so you can make wise choices and strengthen your mind. The topics range from health, wealth, and self, so there's something there for all you guys. Whether you're looking for books for yourself or maybe you're researching ideas for other men, this is going to be a resource that brings you value. So check out the lionwithin.us/book to see what would serve you the best right now and start sharpening your mind to be that leader you're predestined to be. That's the lionwithin.us/book to learn more. So, Marcus, I wanted to unpack at least one more because it really jumped out at me. But where you talk about identify subroutines, and again, this is actions that guys can take if they're going through trials and or times in their life. So, I think this could be applicable to so many different guys right now. But why is it important to identify those subroutines, and then what should we do with them?
Yeah, so subroutines basically like those are the basic things that you need to do to take care of yourself each day. Like putting on your gym clothes might be a subroutine. Doing something that's routine during the course of the day. For somebody, for example, who's in severe depression, one of the best things to do is to basically break down a much larger task into very, very small pieces, because it's kind of hard to see broader horizons when you're in a depressive state. And so subroutines could be as basic as like, hey, set your alarm, get up at the same time every day. Have some sort of rhythm going, because I talked before about if your most important relationship has just dissolved, everything seems to be fluid. And so by establishing small subroutines, you're making beachheads into something that is at least approximating a certain level of stability in your life. And by kind of, for a little while, you kind of have to practice putting yourself into a position of treating yourself as if you're someone that you're responsible for taking care of. And so what that means is like, it's sort of like the Freudian idea of the superego, right? It's that thing that's above and monitoring the smaller things. And there's also a way that you can, when you're sort of losing motivation and losing your why for that whole process, the idea of subroutines as well is like, okay, how does my, getting myself up in the morning at the same time every day contribute to the bigger thing that I'm about? How do I tie that in to my bigger mission? How do I relate what I'm doing on the small scale to where I want to be 5-10 years from now, to what I want to leave as a legacy? And so when you're doing that, then suddenly you're getting up in the morning at an hour that you prefer not to is tied with a much bigger purpose in your life. And it's not just some like, well, I saw this thing on Instagram where discipline equals freedom and I should just do it. Maybe there's a time for that. If somebody who's just like, hey, just to begin with, just trust me, just get up at the same time, get in the sunlight, move your body, like just have a little bit of faith in me. And then hopefully eventually that turns into new habits that you can form. This also is kind of speaking to how when a lot of things dissolve and you're restarting them, maybe it was the case that before you didn't have a good gym routine in the morning or whatever time of day you like. Maybe it was the case that you did eat like crap and you just never had a good reason to confront it. Again, nutrition also, like I talked about, strengthening the body to help the mind cope. Nutrition plays an enormous role. And maybe that never really came to light before you had such a crisis. I heard a story about a guy who was in this apartment that had like a little bit of mold, but the rent was affordable and it was good enough. But the thing is, like, you don't want to live in mold. Like, you need to move away from that. And so maybe the best thing for him was to actually have more mold in the apartment to compel him to go move to a better place.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, maybe like having a relationship that's good enough isn't good for you. Does that make sense? So
Mm-hmm.
if it's good enough and I'm kind of getting along, but maybe I'm gaining a pound here or two, but it's not that bad, bro, you got a little bit of mold. Like we hopefully through mentorship and through the process of engaging in a Christ-like group of men, you can kind of develop that within an existing relationship, right? But when a divorce happens, it's all very accelerated. And so,
Yeah.
again, it's an opportunity to really reevaluate those things that are important and set you up for future success.
I love it. I mean, I think it's so important too, because so many times as guys, we just set these big, hairy, audacious goals, and it's cool. We need to have those, but you need to put the subroutines in place that you can achieve it. Like a couple subroutines for me. You mentioned, gym clothes. That's it. Like my clothes are laid out the night before. That's a subroutine that for me, when I wake up, I don't have to think about it. The clothes are there. I'm gonna put them on. We're gonna work out. It's just part of it, right? I have a goal of every day drinking a gallon of water. So a subroutine. I have that gallon of water filled up the night before. So when I wake up the next day, I don't have to do that stuff. It's just there, right? I mean, so it's just small little steps like that, but those subroutines are so critical, man. So, this has been some really good steps. The last one I want to ask you about, you just make a point blank statement. If you've gone through divorce or separation, don't hate marriage, and I think that's so important to reiterate with our guys. Can't even talk today for some reason. So this morning, why would you go there? And make that your last point.
Man, so I found that there was a time, probably a good year, or I would say during the entire duration of that separation, where I did start to resent like when marriages were going well for people. So like when I would see somebody else doing well, the cynic in me, like I talked about sort of these sub-personalities before. I'm gonna let my dog out here. The sub-personalities before, like one of them will be the cynic, right? You've got a cynic within you. And he is there to protect you from like experiencing that relationship burn again. And that also is normal, right? So if you find like, oh my gosh, I'm being so hateful about these other things that I didn't used to have, as far as I'm concerned, like that could be expected. And there's something to that. So the cynic isn't totally wrong. It's like, man, like relationships like marriage could burn you so bad. Maybe they're better off just not. Maybe I just shouldn't take part in them anymore. There's an online group called MGTOW, which is Men Going Their Own Way, and their whole idea is like, look, this modern institution of marriage and the way that the court systems are set up and this and that are so rigged against men. Then I'm just gonna, as an act of rebellion, sort of go my own way and forsake anything to do with marriage, anything to do with relationships with women. And I can kind of understand that, honestly. Like that, there was an appeal to that. It's like, man, if I'm going to be hurt this bad, it's just not worth the risk. But the thing is, like, love always bears risk, and if it doesn't, it's not love. And that's the risk that Christ took on me. So to not hate marriage is to remember that, like, look, the fact that it could fail is what makes it a marriage. It's what makes it love, right? If you're experiencing so much pain from all of this, it's interesting. In antiquity, the gods for war and love were very closely related. So why? It's because with love, you're taking a risk on someone. You're allowing yourself to potentially be hurt for its own sake. For the sake of love itself. I talked about how you don't sacrifice for the other person, you sacrifice for the relationship. Well, that's if you think that you need to sacrifice for human beings who are flawed, you're going to get cynical about what marriage is. And for me, part of my recovery was like renewing my goodwill toward other people's whose marriages were going well. Because there definitely was a time where I was just like really resenting, like, well, it's probably not going to last. Well, you're probably not happy. Well, this, well, that. And it's like, man, like I need to call you for something better here. I need you to see this from a different perspective.
Yeah. We gotta be so careful, guys, because the next thing you know, bitterness that sinks in, and once bitterness starts to grow, it's so hard to get it out of your heart. So, Marcus, what do you think's next, man? I mean, how's this? You've gone through this trial. You wrote this great book. what's your outlook on relationships now? How has that changed, particularly in the area of marriage, and what's coming for you down the road?
I mean, right now I'm kind of in a point where I'm very focused on kind of career goals and school goals. I'm going through a master's program and may end up pursuing a PhD, following in my dad's footsteps. So that's really at the forefront of my efforts now. I mean, sure, I'm open to some relationship in the future, but that's something that I don't think that I've been reflecting on this. I heard this from Dennis Prager. He says, I never ask God for things that I want. I ask God for what he wants for me. And so that's been my operative question lately, especially as it relates to a future marriage.
Love it. Love that, man. Well, before we wrap up, let's do a fun, we always do this on the line with Dennis, a lightning round. We call it feeding time. We just have a few quick fire questions for you, just, kind of a light way to end, but also just give our guys a little more insight to you. So if you're willing to play, man, we'll jump in.
Sure. Let's go for it.
All right, cool. Well, let's just start off at, what's your favorite thing about God? When you think about God, what's your favorite thing about him?
Ooh, what comes to mind right away is the depth of the way that he can love you. I thought about this of provision, like give us today our daily bread. So God knows me well enough that the types of things that he gives me are specifically for me. Like the provision for me isn't like, oh, my son needs food, I'm going to deliver, 10 pounds of oats at his door. Like, no, I'm not about that. It's like, here's a ribeye for Marcus. Like, and so there have been so many instances in life, but we just don't have time to get through all of them, where God's shown me in his love in like the details, like the finest details. Like,
yeah,
hey, son, I knew that you would love this specifically, so I'm going to give it to you. Yeah, so I would say, and God's so cool the way that he works that out, because like it's very specific provision, but the way that you receive it is very mysterious, which is why it's called manna, right? It's like, what is this?
Right, exactly. Our second question, what's your least favorite thing about Satan?
That he gives voices to certain urges so loudly. And that when you feel like at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I actually contended with them pretty well. The next morning you wake up, it's like, I thought I did this yesterday. And there it is again.
Yes, it definitely is a struggle, man. So what's something right now that you are currently battling or struggling with that we always like to do this because everybody thinks when they hear all these guests, they got all the stuff figured out. They have life. They're crushing it. And what I want to do is let all the listeners know, hey, we all have something that we're struggling with. So anything that pops to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I want to be a father. I want to have a family and be part of that. And right now I just don't really see a path toward that at all. Okay. And so like I bought a house here recently, and it's a, pretty sizable house, and I'm kind of set up to step into that role. But, in terms of like when that will ever happen, I have to just let that go, because for the last, what feels like for a very long time now, I've kind of been more actively pursuing that and like sort of putting myself out there, as it were. And this season I'm kind of just taking a break from that and taking a knee. Just like contending with like, well, I'm 32 now, I'm not old, but I'm not like a spring chicken either. So isn't it time already that, I have that in my life and that's restored? And the answer to that is no. And I don't know why. And so yeah, that's kind of been a struggle, but it's also, again, it kind of goes back to like, what does God want from me now? If he wanted me in a marriage, wouldn't I be there? Like, isn't God bigger than that? And so just resting in that truth.
Amen, brother. Well, just keep the faith and keep doing it. Like I tell guys all the time, man, we got to take care of ourselves and be the guy, be the man that the future Mrs. Farris is looking for. Like if we focus on being that guy and not so much focus about finding her, God's going to take care of the rest, right? So that's good stuff there. So what last year, if you looked at the past year, what did you spend too much time doing?
Oh man. To be brutally honest, scrolling dating apps, it's like those things can get addictive and they're not helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've even got on my iPhone, there's a feature where like when you've used an app for a certain amount of time, it'll say like, oh, time limit's up. And, it's very easy to just think like, maybe I'll respect that tomorrow.
There you go. What's two more questions? What's a new habit that you want to create moving forward?
Well, I'm probably going to be stepping into more of a research role at my job. So segmenting time out during the day for that. So there are a lot of days I can kind of fire from the hip as it relates to scheduling, but having something that's more like, hey, from the hours of 9 to, I don't know, up till lunch, like you need to just focus solely on doing that kind of research. And just it's nice to kind of have this time off to not be in that sort of scheduled mode. And I think everyone needs a time off for that. But yeah, that's going to be one of my focuses this year is what does it look like to really take seriously the thing that the Bible talks about, like make the most of your time because the days are evil. And so, just honoring, there's a Buddhist saying that says, the trouble is you think you have time.
Yeah.
And so, taking that to heart.
I'd encourage you to check out, you may already have, Cal Newport's Deep Work. That's a great one. It talks about that, blocking those times and then how to really get deep in those areas to take advantage of it. So that's one. Last question for you, Marcus, is what is one thing that you hope the listeners out there remember from our conversation today?
Yeah, that a broken heart is a feature of the human experience, not a flaw. So I said that I was going to be hurt one way or the other. The world is going to hurt everyone, but that's given the realities of sin and the curse that we're under, that is part of the process. Even if it was like you hurting yourself, it doesn't mean that everything is irrevocably wrong. There wouldn't be a need for restoration if there was nothing to restore. And so, see yourself in that light. No one's expecting you to make all of the right decisions all of the time because we're given a very tiny slice of all of the information there is to know. So how could we possibly make the so-called best decision in every circumstance? Right. I think generally speaking, people are doing the best that they can with what they have. And some days you have to do that. And some days that means making decisions that aren't just a basic black and white of like, well, the Bible says do it this way. Well, the Bible gave us obscure letters written in the first century to various church groups. There was no like manual of do it this way, right? And so that's why we have to cultivate wisdom, is understanding how to navigate, seasons that are very gray and ambiguous, and most of life falls in that category. But the thing that God wants for you in that season is to learn to make those difficult decisions that are not black and white, and that's normal.
Right. Well, Marcus, this has been a wonderful conversation. Where should guys go to learn more about you, connect? Obviously, this will be our featured book of the week, so we'll make sure that's out there so the guys can grab a copy of that. But any place you would direct them?
Sure. The book's website is nolessfaithfulbook.com. You can find it on Amazon. I also have a blog that I write on every once in a while. If you just Google search, what's on my Instagram, actually, it's in my profile link. My Instagram is at ultramarathons, spelled Farris. You can find all of it there. Okay.
And we'll make sure we sync all that up in the show notes for the listeners, Marcus, so that they can check that out directly. And we'll have a link to your blog as well. So anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today on The Lion Within Us?
Figure out what your core values are, and make sure that your small steps each day are linked to those in some way. And I think that'll bring you far.
Amen, man. That was powerful right there. Well, Marcus, this has been an honor to have you on here, sir. Thank you so much for the wisdom you shared, and pray blessings for you in the future, my friend.
Greatly appreciate it, Chris.
How would you like more strength, fortitude, and confidence in the battle called life? We created a guide that outlines 9 powerful habits that will strengthen the physical, mental, and spiritual areas you need to start making an impact today. To get your free guide, check out the link in the show notes or visit thelionwithin.us/habits. That's thelionwithin.us/habits, and start creating the habits you need to be the leader you're predestined to be. His story was incredible. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of that. I know for me, I like the tactics that he talked about. And so far as thinking out loud, that's a big one. Working, doing hard stuff with other men, that's a big one too. But the practice with your pen, how many times do you guys actually sit down and write? Or just type, right? Outside of a text message, that don't count, guys. I'm talking about actually just writing your thoughts. That's important to take some of these things and put them into practice, because You don't want to be bitter. You know what? Maybe you're in that season of life right now. You don't have a wife, and you really want one, and you want it to work out. You want a family. You got to, again, go back to the very beginning of this episode. What I said at the beginning, you need to take care of yourself and be the man and create the man that the future misses, whatever your last name is, that she's looking for. That's what you can control. There are a lot of variables out there. There's too many times I hear guys talking about just looking for the one, just looking for the one. Stop looking. Like, you take care of yourself, and you be the one. Take care to where the one is going to be attracted to you. And again, taking care of our health, our mind, and our body, taking care of our finances, taking care of being the godly man that he has called us to be. You're doing all those things. You just have to be patient and understand God is sovereign over all things. And that when the timing's right, and his timing's always right, he's never early. That's what guys struggle with. You'll be ready. So guys, I want you to think about it. If you are in marriage right now, maybe you're struggling with your marriage. Here's your question for the week. Is marriage a covenant or a contract? Because if you're treating it as a covenant, that's going to put you on such a great path. But too many guys think of it as a contract. If you, then I. Remember, covenant, no matter what I do. So guys, hopefully this gave you a lot of resources here, a lot of insight, and served you well today. I highly encourage you to check out the show notes. We'll make sure we hook up all the links from Marcus there. Go give us a rating and review. That makes a big difference. And then share the episode. That's the biggest thing you could do as well. Just share it. Text this episode out. So if someone's going through a divorce or going through a trial, maybe they're separated right now, share it out to them. They need to have these types of stories, these types of insight to help them. So you never know what just sharing a conversation like this with someone who's struggling, who's going through a trial, what that could do for them, how you could serve them just by taking that one act. So there you go. That's a big way you can do it. Next thing you can do, if you're going through a trial, if you're going through a divorce, or if you're going through it and you've walked through it and you've come on the other side, you have a great opportunity to share that experience with other men. How do you do it? You jump into our community. That's it. We're inside the Lion Within Us community. We have guys who have been through separations, been through divorces. They walk the road. They understand what you're going through, and they'll be able to help you. They'll be able to come alongside of you to put their arm around you. Brother, I got you. Let's talk. Let's be here to be the iron that sharpens iron through this trial. So to join the community, you need to take action. Go to thelionwithin.us. That's thelionwithin.us. Join the community. There's a 30-day free trial. So you literally have nothing to lose. Just take the time, join, and get active. Come to a couple of our live events. Come to a live Ask Me Anything event. Come to some Lion lunches, to our Bible study. Be engaged. Put some posts out there around areas that you're struggling with, how we can help serve you. All these different things are available inside the community, guys. That's where it's at. That's where it's happening. So again, thank you for listening to the show. To take it to the next level, to be the man God intends you to be, you need to hop into the community and be there with other brothers that are here that's ready to serve. So hopefully, guys, this serves you well today. Get after it. Come back on Friday. I have some really good tips that are going to help you kind of shape, grow. Again, all about being that leader God intends you to be. So hopefully I'll see you back here on Fun Friday. And don't forget the dad jokes. I got a couple good ones lined up for you guys. You get after it, enjoy it, work hard, push yourselves, do whatever he tells you to do. And don't forget to unleash the lion within.